let's talk about the mask. First and foremost, I'm going to start by saying I have nothing against the mask. Whether it's COVID requirements or now we're heading into 2023, whether it's because you suffer from halitosis or a medical condition, or you have a bad cold that you don't want to pass on, or just anxiety from all the individuals around you, whether it's in your workspace, whether it's retail, it doesn't matter. That anxiety of you have to wear the mask or else, right? The public pressure. It has to be, for me, I don't care. As long as it's a personal choice. And where am I going with this? I'm going to call this a Florida, Canada, Cuba experiment. And in the respect of Governor DeSantis in Florida, I'm going to call it the Florida experiment right now. So we traveled from Canada to Cuba recently. And we went from Montreal, Canada to Cuba. So the process when we got to the airport, the majority of people not wearing their masks outside. They get into the airport, what starts transpiring, people's masks start coming on. We got to the security checkpoint area where you had to wear the mask, otherwise you couldn't go through. They tell you to wear the mask. So everybody wears their mask going through the security checkpoint. When we got past the security checkpoint, my dyslexic mind started noticing that about 25% of the people did not have masks on. So then we get into the plane where you have no choice but to wear a mask. Otherwise, you're greeted at the door by law enforcement. We saw the millions of videos, so everybody wears a mask. We get to Cuba. And as you know, when you're traveling in resorts, you go from the plane to the bus, to the resort, and the resort back to the bus and back. So those 7 days, you get to know people, right? You get to know people really well. So when we got to the bus and then we got to the airport in Cuba, what do you think happened? In the bus, everybody's wearing their mask. We get to the airport in Cuba, masks start coming off. Why? Because the majority of the individuals started noticing people in Cuba were not wearing masks. They didn't enforce it. So we started going through the Cuban airport onto the bus. Again, more people started removing the mask. By the time we got to the resort, a large percentage of individuals did not wear their masks when they got to the check-in line at the resort. What do you think transpired in those 7 days? The majority, the 7 days, 99.9% of all individuals were not wearing a mask at all, right? So those same individuals singing, dancing, laughing, conversing, drinking, all that stuff was going on those 7 days, did not wear a mask at all. Why? Because it wasn't enforced. So here it is, we're in a communist country, and as we know, in communist country, as marketed as being tough on its people, right? So the people that are tough on its people weren't enforcing masks in their country, unlike Canada. So then when the resort, when it was done, we got back onto the bus going back home. Still at the airport in Cuba, the majority weren't wearing masks because they just spent 7 days of laughing, enjoying the sunshine and all that. Then we got onto the bus. The majority were still not wearing the mask. What do you think transpired? We got onto the plane. Everybody wears a mask because you have no choice or law enforcement shows up. And then when we got to Canada, this is what my observations kicked in again, is that the majority of the people they kept their mask on. They kept their masks on at the airport, and outside the airport, they kept their masks on. Right? The same individual, the same eyes, same heart, same soul, same carbon fiber kept their masks on in Canada, but they removed it off in the 7 days while they were in Cuba. What has changed? Nothing. Same human being. Nothing has changed other than compliance, other than political pressure, political science. As we're seeing right now in the court system in Canada where it's being challenged, they are admitting that it was political science. It wasn't backed by science, all these restrictions on travel. On top of that, when we got to Cuba, what was interesting is that they didn't segregate individuals. They didn't separate individuals, meaning when you get back to Canada, just like all countries, you go through your passport, you show your passport, you do the pictures, you fill out the paperwork, you go onto the digital screen, you enter all that data. Cuba has a similar system where they take your pictures, all that stuff, they check your passport, stamp your passport, etc., right? But in Canada, are you vaccinated or not vaccinated? If you're not vaccinated, go to this lineup. If you choose not to do the CAN app, whether you're vaccinated or not, there's people that are fully vaccinated in this country and chose not to do the CAN app because they don't want to disclose their vaccination status. They don't want to disclose their medical status. So those individuals were still forced, just like all the unvaccinated, forced to quarantine for 14 days, and we're heading into 2023. Think about that for a second. That is my Florida experiment here, DeSantis. Because DeSantis said if you had $1 for every Californian or public figure or political figure from around the world, and mask enforcers, that went to his state and all took off their masks. The entire time they were there throughout the whole COVID thing, they all took off their masks. I witnessed it personally. So all these Canadians, in the last 2 years, some of the mask enforcers within Canada that travel, and that's why you saw those pictures of the Prime Minister, right? He's in a different country, he's not wearing a mask. He's in Canada, he's wearing a mask. He's on a provincial train, he's not wearing a mask. He's on a federal train, he's wearing a mask. Political science, ladies and gentlemen, where a communist country that is hard on its people did not even enforce. Think about that for a second, right? Jean-Guy Bourguignon, Jean-Guy public communicator, it has to be a personal choice. Whether you have halitosis, whether you're sick, whether you got a cold, whether you just want to follow restriction or when in Rome, it has to be a personal choice. We're heading into 2023. The political science needs to be turned off.